Kentucky basketball has a ton of talent up and down their roster, but there's one guy in particular that could end up being the team's most valuable player this season.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are continuing our player preview series with Andrew Carr, the team's starting power forward, somebody that Mark Pope absolutely loves on this team. Could he end up being the team's most valuable player? We'll discuss it on today's episode. Also on today's episode, can you believe it? Kentucky football going on the road and stunning the number 5 Ole Miss Rebels, coming up clutch in the late moments. Going to talk about the highlights, going to talk about why going for it does in fact pay off. The defense, everything from that contest, it was excellent. And then we're going to discuss moving forward for Kentucky football, because I think a lot of aspirations that the team had heading into this season are still on the table. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can visit FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. Let's go ahead and get into it. I believe that Andrew Carr could end up being the most valuable player on Kentucky's roster. As we have continued to do, we've gone through our player preview series. We've talked about a few Kentucky Wildcats so far, Kobe Bryant, Jackson Robinson, but we are going to shift our focus to what may end up being the best overall player on Kentucky's roster. And I don't necessarily mean that in terms of NBA potential or even athleticism. I just mean in terms of raw basketball skill and then what the statistics will reflect at the very end of the day. I think you're looking for an all-around player. You're looking for somebody that can score, that can defend, obviously those two things, but the specifics, that can score in a variety of ways, that can defend at the rim or possibly beyond that, somebody that can grab rebounds, somebody that can assist, all of that stuff. Also, while shooting at a pretty solid percentage. And Andrew Carr, when you go and look at what he was doing at Wake Forest and then previously at Delaware, he checks every single one of those boxes. And I know we've talked a lot about the forward position and kind of how maybe Kentucky wants to rotate that this upcoming season with Ainsley Almanor. Does Jackson Robinson get into the fold because he primarily played power forward during his time at BYU a season ago as sixth man in the Big 12. So what does Kentucky do with their rotation? A lot of fun things I think they could do to mix and match with this lineup. But I think it starts here at power forward with Wake Forest transfer Andrew Carr. In case you don't know his stats from a season ago, he averaged 13.5 points per game while shooting 53% from the floor. He shot 37.1% from three. He averaged 6.8 rebounds, 1.5 steals, 1.5 assists, and 1.5 blocks. He had half a steal per contest in 32-ish minutes of play. Before that, he was at Wake Forest for another season, statistically worse in a lot of categories, but when you look at his final year at Delaware in 2021-22, he shot really, really well from the floor while averaging 10 points a game. He shot 56.4%. He shot 40% from three. You had the rebounds, you had the assists, you had the blocks. He actually averaged a steal per game in that sophomore season. So he's really been able to kind of maintain a level of solid play for a 6'9" stretch four type of guy to consistently shoot over 30% from three. He's averaging 34.5% from three for his entire career. I mean, that's solid. And for him to kind of take things up from a volume perspective over these final two seasons at Wake Forest, go from 1.2 threes to 3.2 to 2.8 this past season, he can shoot from beyond the arc. But it's not just about that, right? It's also about what he's able to do in the post. He's pretty effective in the post. He's also really, really solid as a cutter or a slasher as well. You get to see that in some of his synergy tape. And when you watch him on the defensive end of the floor, I know that there are some people that are going to say, well, he's not as good as Amari Williams, or maybe he doesn't have the upside that somebody like Brandon Garrison does. I think that he is still a plus defender, and I think that numbers would reflect that. If you want to go look at Sports Reference, if you want to go see his offensive and defensive plus minus, he has consistently been a pretty solid defender. He actually had his best defensive season just a season ago, at least in my opinion, and I think the numbers reflect that as well. So Andrew Carr at 6'9", 210, can stretch the floor, can score in a variety of ways on offense, can defend, and then also something that I think is an underrated aspect of his game that could end up being really, really important for the Cats this season. He is a good rebounder. Does Kentucky have a ton of really solid rebounders on this team? I don't think they do. I think the Cats, unless they just have just an incredible amount of effort on the court, which they very well could be given the structure and coaching of this program, they are going to probably be an average team rebounding the basketball in rebounding margin. I think they're going to be fine. I think they'll be okay to good, but they're not going to be anything special unless players like this step up. Like I mentioned, 6.8 rebounds per game a season ago. That was a career high by a pretty solid margin, by almost an entire rebound. Can you get guys like Andrew Carr to commit on every single play, going after rebounds, defending, and then can you give him the opportunities to score on the other end? I think that with Carr, I know we talk a lot about his ability to step out from beyond the arc and shoot. I think it starts with his defense. I think it starts with what you can do at power forward. And honestly, Carr's going to be a huge talking point when we get to that Duke game because of the amount of extremely talented, lengthy forwards that the Blue Devils possess. Most notably, Cooper Flagg. Could this end up being Kentucky's MVP because of all the different things that he's able to do? At the end of the season, I think it's very plausible that he could be. Let me know what you think in the comments below about Andrew Carr and the Wildcats this season. All right, we're going to shift our focus to football here. The Wildcats came up clutch in a win over Ole Miss this weekend. Extremely fun game. I want to dive into it here in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is all over at FanDuel.com. Again, get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet over at FanDuel.com. All right, continuing along here on the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are less than a month away from Kentucky basketball's first exhibition game. I am super excited about it. Let me know in the comments below what you're expecting of Andrew Carr, what you're expecting of the Cats this season. We're going to be continuing to preview things, kind of give everybody a little bit of a refresher as to what this team is about. I'm thrilled. Subscribe if you are new. If you have not seen the show before, if you are listening to this for the first time, thank you so much for tuning in, by the way. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble about Andrew Carr and how he could be really good this season. Subscribe. It's going to be great. Love to interact with you guys in the comments, answer questions. So anything you guys want answered, I can do it here for you on the show about the Kentucky Wildcats. And let's talk here about a moment in Kentucky athletics history. Wildcats 20. Number 6, Ole Miss 17. I said number 5 earlier, correction. They were ranked number 6. Wildcats go on the road, and get a victory over a top 10 opponent. It's their best ranked win since they beat Penn State in 1977. Absolutely incredible defensive performance. Ole Miss came into this game with the nation's #1 passing offense. Jackson Dart, a Heisman candidate. He did not play bad in this game per se, at least from a statistics perspective, but from a Kentucky perspective, I mean, this is probably as good as any team will do this year. Full stop. Maybe with the exception of Georgia, and I'm really not sure if that's the case, especially after what we saw on Saturday, the game of the year with Bama and the Bulldogs. But You had a major issue coming into this one. You did not have your starting cornerback, Maxwell Hairston, an NFL player, a Sunday player, objectively one of the best, if not the best player on Kentucky's roster in terms of just talent. I mean, you've got Deion Walker, you've got Dane Key, you've got Barry and Brown, but man, Hairston has been special. He's out, and you're going up against a juggernaut offensively, and you know what happens? First possession that Ole Miss has, they just march down that field, and they score a touchdown. Looked like Kentucky really wasn't given much effort at all. It was a little disheartening, a little frustrating, but they regrouped. Kentucky themselves drove down the field, bled clock, and got into field goal range, kicked a field goal, made it 7-3. And then from that point on, it was clear Kentucky was about to do what they did to Georgia and what they've done to essentially every other top 25 opponent that they faced over the past several years underneath Mark Stoops. They were going to grab you, they were going to pin you down, and they were going to make you get out. They were not going to let go. If you're comparing this to MMA fighting, Kentucky 1,000% a grappler. Ole Miss, striker. You know what happens when a really good grappler goes up against even a really good striker? They're going to get you down, and they're not going to let you go, and they're going to wear you out. Kentucky physically imposed their will against a top 10 opponent over the weekend. Just dominated. Defensively, they were so good on third down. Look at these numbers. 1 of 10 on third down for the Ole Miss Rebels. 1 of 10. Jackson Dart, 18 of 27, 261 yards, 1 touchdown, only 1 touchdown through the air. You kept everything in front of you without Hairston. Sure, he had a high completion percentage, but the number 1 offense in the country shut down. 353 total yards, 261 through the air, only 92 rushing, 3.2 yards per rush. That Kentucky front is legitimate. Octavius Oxendine, Deion Walker, those guys are real. Those guys are legit dudes. Only 14 first downs for the Ole Miss Rebels. 14. Kentucky had 8 more. If I had told you that Kentucky was going to go into Oxford over the weekend and they were going to finish with 8 more first downs than the Ole Miss Rebels, I mean, that stat alone would give me hope or make me completely believe, hey, the Cats won this thing. And give the offense credit. They played well. We'll get to the offense in a little bit. But for the defense, for Brad White to put out that performance against Ole Miss, to just go out there and manhandle them for 4 straight quarters. I mean, for 4 straight quarters, there was not a dip in this game. That was incredible. Penalties cost Ole Miss just a little bit at different points. But I don't think that's that's a reason why they lost. At the end of the day, it was their inability to move the ball because of just how good Kentucky's defensive front was. If you want to go take a look at the stats, shout out JQ Hardaway, in the secondary, 11 tackles. Pop Dumas Johnson, 7 tackles. Georgia transfer, insane. He also had half a sack and 1.5 tackles per loss. Jordan Levitt was solid. Oxendine had 2 sacks in this game. J.J. Weaver had a sack. Kentucky had 4 as a team, 7 TFLs. Obviously, Kentucky's offensive line struggled as well. 5 sacks allowed, 10 TFLs. Not great, but this team is built to weather the storm. They're built to weather things like that. Coming out of that South Carolina game, I thought Kentucky doesn't have the juice, the energy on either side of the ball. They've got a couple of really solid skill position players, but at the end of the day, if they're not able to push people around, they're going to be bad. And the offensive line, I think up until this point, has proven, they're not good. They're not great. But the defense has decided to step things up. I know the team I'm about to sound like when I say this. if you had just a little bit better production from your offense, just a little bit, you'd be 4-1 or 5-0. Probably 4-1. I don't know if that's good enough to beat South Carolina. You'd be 4-1 with wins over number 6 Ole Miss, and I think top-ranked Georgia at the time. I think they were top-ranked. You were so close. You are so close. Let's talk about some of the players on offense. Let's talk about why it's important to go for it. That's a big stat in this game. We'll get to it in a minute. Before we get into that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. I have absolutely loved using Game Time for events this season. It's funny. This is not scripted. I actually use them a lot to go to Atlanta Braves games, and I actually have on this monitor over here, I have the Braves-Mets game. If the Braves win this, they clinch and go to the playoffs, and I would love to go catch a Braves playoff game using Game Time because they are just objectively the only place you need to go to get tickets. They have this new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your live events even easier. They filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And I'm going to go to a college football game this Thursday, and I didn't want to have to try and sort out whether or not I could find good tickets in a specific spot that I wanted. Boom, immediately. And it's all in pricing as well. They show you immediately up front what everything's going to be, and it's an incredible app. Incredible app. You can take the guesswork out of buying your tickets over at Game Time. And it's not just, by the way, for sporting events. Curation makes it easier to save on sports, concerts, comedy, theater. Again, all in pricing. They've got seat views. They've got the lowest price guarantee, which means if you find a ticket in the same section or row for less elsewhere, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Again, just objectively the best place, the only place you need to go get your tickets. You can download the Game Time app. You can create an account. You can use code LOCKEDONCollege. That is LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Pretty sweet deal, especially if you want to go to a college football game soon. That's terms apply. Create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, wrapping up the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky. So we're here chatting it up about Kentucky football, just how well they played. We talked about the defense. Let's discuss the offense here briefly, and let's look ahead. So Brock Vandegrift, he got banged up at various points in this game. And I don't mean banged up injured. I mean just like they ran so much QB draw. I mean, they were just hammering Brock Vandegrift and Gavin Wimsatt. Shout out Gavin for some tough running in this game as well. Demi Sumo-Karngbe was decent. On the whole, Kentucky wasn't really able to run the ball efficiently outside of Karngbe just because they kept taking sacks. Will Cox had a really nice run of 17 yards at one point in this game where the vision was great. The freshman's going to be good. I fully believe that, especially if the offensive line improves. Vandegrift, though, no turnovers. 18 of 28 passing for 243 yards and a touchdown. And then that absolute bomb to Berrien Brown. Berrien Brown had 88 yards in this game. Dane Key, 8 receptions, 105, and a touchdown. He's good, y'all. He's legit. I know a lot of people. There were some people in my comment section earlier this year saying, why are you talking so much about Dane Key? He statistically regressed last year. He wasn't as good. And I don't understand that because not only did he not, but also year 3, baby, he's an improved player. 105 yards in this game. But the bomb to Berrien Brown, it's 4th down. You're inside, I believe, the 30. You're inside your own 30. And you got to go for it. And instead of punting it away, like Mark Stoops did, he decided to go for it and threw an absolute bomb, a prayer of a pass that was completed to Brown. Just an insane play. Kentucky 3 of 3 on 4th down in this game. Obviously, it doesn't work out every single time. And even if it didn't work out, If Kentucky decided to say, screw it, we're throwing the long ball, and it was incomplete, broken up, whatever, at least you tried. At least you tried. That's what I was saying coming out of the Georgia game. At least you make an effort, right? And they didn't in that contest. They punted away with 3 minutes left because they were afraid of what could happen. And then they turn around in this game, and they execute. They executed so well on fourth down. This is why you go for it in the big moments. It will pay off, potentially, and to quote Michael Scott from The Office, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky. You got to at least go out there and try, man. I mean, what do you have to lose? You're 2-2. You're on the road against a top 10 team. You're down. You have to make a stand. You have to make a push at some point. Just throw it. Just go for it, man. Nobody's going to look at you differently if you do or if you don't. Or excuse me, if you don't, yeah, you'll be fine. Kentucky ended up being fine. And then look ahead at the schedule. So again, you could be 4-1 right now. Could be, should be. You have a bye week this weekend. Then you play Vanderbilt at home. We're not going to call any games gimmies. I'm just going to tell you what is currently projected. Vanderbilt should lose that game to Kentucky. So 4-2. At Florida, ESPN's FBI thinks Kentucky's going to win. 5-2. Auburn, ESPN's FBI thinks Kentucky's going to win. 6-2 heading into Tennessee. I know how good Tennessee is. Offensively, they're great. They throw the ball around. They play with tempo. They run the crap out of the ball. That's an underrated fact about Tennessee football. Everybody thinks about Nico. Everybody thinks about the receivers. They run the ball better than nearly anybody in the country. It is incredible. But who's to say, man, if Kentucky can hang with Georgia, if they can hang with Ole Miss and beat them on the road, who's to say Kentucky can't beat Tennessee? You cannot sit here and tell me that there is no shot Kentucky can't pull that off. You got Murray State, you've got Texas, you've got Louisville. If your 3 losses are to South Carolina, Georgia, and Texas, and you have wins against Ole Miss and Tennessee, and Louisville, who should be ranked, the playoff is still in the picture. Now, Kentucky may not get there. They may have finished 7-5 or 8-4, which is probably the most realistic outcome. But it's still on the table in my mind, and I think the team, I hope they realize that, and I hope they're pushing for it. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave those in the YouTube comments below. You can hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.